Okay, Colin? Okay, we'll call the special council meeting to order. There are just a few items on it, but one substantial one. First item is the repeal of the designation bylaw. Someone prepared to move that? Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by? Seconded by? Councillor Singh? Sorry, I didn't see hands. Those in favour? Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that. Councillor Yanetsky first.
I'm not happy in terms of what we have here before us in terms of the staff recommendation in removing the designation. Granted, the buildings are all demolished, and granted that parts of those buildings have been set aside in city storage. And it is my understanding that when the new development and project comes on stream, that portions of the former buildings will be incorporated one way or the other into the new design. Well, it's assumed, it's not given. And I feel that it is necessary that this be incorporated, and if we remove the designation from the property, that'll allow the future builder to not incorporate it. I think it's important that this designation remain on the property to provide, and even though it won't be in the same format that what was there before, but it's still remnants of that building are still around and could be incorporated. And if we don't do it, it won't be incorporated for a future consideration as being a former forest-site location that it was back as, in the industrial use that it was back in the city in its earlier days. So okay. I'm not prepared to support this.
McDonald, wants to speak to that?
Yes, through you, Your Worship. As you know, the buildings have been demolished on this site and the attributes are no longer there. So it's totally appropriate under the legislation to actually repeal this bylaw. It is a condition of the various agreements that we have with the purchaser to incorporate some of those attributes into the new development. And in fact, it's part of the site plan agreement as well.
So the designation that is there now on the property related to the former buildings and the components, though, that were set aside are included in our agreements with Andren and in the site plan?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Councillor Gazzola.
I still have a question.
Okay, then go ahead.
A question to Mr. Benzasson. In terms of what we have before us and the designation that was previously on the property, and with the objective of hoping and I guess having the former parts of the building, historical parts, incorporated, wouldn't it be prudent to have some type of designation within that to recognize the heritage component of it?
Mr. Benzasson.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The current designating bylaw made reference to specific buildings and features which are no longer on the site. So that bylaw should be repealed since those attributes are no longer on the property. We are very confident through the Heritage Impact Assessment that was prepared as a condition of the site plan application for the city centre development that we have matters covered through the conditions of the site plan agreement to address the significance of the Art Deco facade and how that facade is to be incorporated within the new development in phase 2 of that new development. So from staff's perspective, I think we're covered through the conditions and that there isn't a need to apply a new designation on the property.
So then, taking this a step forward, if this does get implemented as the objective is there, would you, through Heritage Committee, be coming back with some type of designation to recognize the past historical component of it and that's building on that site?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can take a look at whether it would be appropriate or not to apply a new designation to acknowledge the significance of the facade. Bear in mind that it's out of the context in terms of where it was formerly located. We could certainly review it and see if it would be appropriate to apply some form of designation in terms of the acknowledgement of the history of the site.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, my questions were along the same line, and I guess they've almost been answered. I was going to ask, is there any harm in leaving it until the completion of Phase 2? What is the harm of leaving it as is?
Mr. Betson?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think the issue here is that the current designating bylaw is no longer appropriate given it makes reference to features and attributes which are essentially no longer on the property. The feature in question is that 1937 Art Deco facade. That's the only one that has been retained, but is now disassembled and off-site. So essentially, the current bylaw is no longer relevant to the property.
Do we have to bring it back on site to keep this in place? I'll leave it at that. The legal staff are going to assure us that it will be looked after in Phase 2. There's something in the agreement that assures that?
Yes, that's correct. In various agreements that pertain to this transaction, as well as the site plan agreement, which is the city's regulatory obligation, include provisions requiring the adaptation of some of those components in Phase 2.
And I assume our heritage staff will be on top of this as the site plan moves forward?
Yes, that is correct.
The other question I wondered, and it's aside from that, is there the possibility in situations like this of having a commemorative plaque somewhere on the site indicating what was there and just a little bit of a dialogue on it? Is that something, who would deal with that issue?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that at least as part of the resurrection of that 1937 Art Deco facade, we will have some signage and some interpretive plaque that would speak to the connection of that physical resource to the site and the significance of the site.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is the Hidden Valley Road bank stabilization. Moved by Pardon me? Okay, moved by Councillor Gazzola, seconded by Councillor Ioannidis. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, is any staff here to deal with that, or?
It looks like Ms. Houston might be able to answer.
This project wasn't budgeted for this year. Is it a stormwater project?
Ms. Houston.
Yes, it is a stormwater project. It wasn't specifically budgeted for this year, but because of the condition and the washouts, we felt it was important to get it done this fall. We are using general provision accounts, so that's why there's funding in place that we can actually address it expeditiously.
When you say general provision out of the stormwater fund?
Yes,
Yeah,
stormwater maintenance program.
Yeah, not out of the city's capital funds.
That's right.
Okay, the other concern I have, and I haven't had an opportunity to follow up on it, there are neighbors on two sides of where this project is passing through, and there were a number of concerns. Have these concerns been cleared up with both those neighbors?
My understanding is that staff did talk to the neighbors and it has been addressed, but we can make sure that happens before we begin any work.
Okay,
Just double check.
once we approve this, it's too late to do anything else, though, right? Is it possible, can this be deferred to next Monday?
We're really anxious to get this underway because of winter coming up, so I would suggest not.
Okay. All right, I would ask that you do follow up to make sure, I will follow up too, so to make sure that everyone's been...
Sure, we'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. The third item is the Victoria Park washroom project. You recall that there, although I was not at the last meeting when this was discussed, there were some issues related to the location, hence the information that is attached to the report. I would suggest that the first item would be to deal with any notice of, or any motion for reconsideration of the Victoria Park washroom project as that resolution from earlier. Is there such a motion? Okay. Seeing none, we'll proceed. Is there a motion related to the original project? Councillor Etherington was up there first. I didn't spot that. So I'll come to you then, Councillor Davey. Councillor Etherington.
I'm sorry, I'm confused, Mr. Mayor. Are we dealing with the reconsideration?
No, we're not. Unless you wished. Okay, so let's go back then to Councillor Davey.
Yes, so following up to the last time we dealt with this, I believe both my motion to reconsider the location should come first, followed by Councillor Gazzola's motion that staff go back and look at this, is the order that I recall. And actually it's in the notes here.
Okay, that's what I was asking.
Sorry, I apologize. I misunderstood the comments.
So there is a motion for reconsideration of the location.
Correct.
Which was dealt with in earlier months. Is there a seconder for that reconsideration? Councillor Singh. This will require, we are 10, so it'll require, thought I had this straight in my mind. Is this the 2/3? Yes. So this will require 7 rather, in order for us to reconsider the location issue only. Not what it is, strictly location. Councillor Gazzola?
Can we, can you refresh our memory a little bit as to what you're driving at?
Certainly. What had happened at previous, I guess it was council, we had defeated the tender, so the intention was to, you had moved the motion to go back to the drawing board to reissue and have staff go back and look at it. And my concern there was because of the incorrect estimate and how much it would cost for a standalone facility, that staff should look again at the other locations, because some of them were much less expensive. In particular, the one at Joseph Street was originally estimated at $167,000 plus HST. So first we would have to reconsider the location, and then we would go back and direct staff to look at it again.
Councillor Gazzola,
The purpose of your motion is to go back and open it up and to look at all not limited to any location.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
okay, this is motion for reconsideration only. I would suggest a recorded vote may be appropriate. Slow. Do you have it there? There we go. Okay, the reconsideration fails. Now I would go to Councillor Etherington. You were next in line.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, a motion to get this matter back on track, and the motion would read the tender T13-072, bracket washroom construction Victoria Park, close bracket, as outlined in Finance and Corporate Services Department Report FCS-13-144, be approved by incorporating the funding options outlined in Infrastructure Services Department Report INS-13-089.
For clarity, that I believe is the original tender recommendation, which was not dealt with back in September, I think was the meeting.
That's correct.
What we dealt with was a separate motion by Councillor Vrbanovich, which was not the original tender itself. So I've got two speakers. Councillor Davey. Oh, hang on a second. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Vrbanovich. Councillor Davey.
So I take it, Mayor Zaire, you're accepting that motion?
I am accepting it.
Okay, question of staff, just so I understand. The tender was turned down less $40,000, so why wouldn't this motion be considered contrary?
The tender itself, as you know, was the motion itself was not brought forward. It was a separate motion that Councillor Vrbanovich had brought forward to go back to the lowest tender and negotiate something else. So I am ruling that it was a different motion. The recommendation itself from staff was not dealt with.
Right, and sorry, my question is directed towards staff because I'm curious about how this is supposed to work. But
okay.
My understanding is, I'm curious why it isn't a contrary motion.
Fair enough. Mr. Collin?
Through you, Mayor Zaire. Robert's Rules indicates that a motion that has a substantially similar intent or has substantially the same question is, as a motion that's been previously considered by council, is deemed to be out of order. It also places the responsibility of deeming what is substantially different in the hands of who's the chair of the meeting. And so it depends on the chair's ruling what they deem to be substantially the same intent or substantially the same question.
Okay, so follow-up question then, and it clearly was, if the tender was defeated based on the cost alone and that cost being too high, if the exact same motion comes back and the cost is in fact higher, why is that not contrary?
Through the mayor, essentially our procedural bylaw as well as Robert's Rules does place the responsibility of determining whether or not a motion is contrary or in order with the person who's chairing the meeting. So in this case with Mayor Zaire, and then that determination is what.
So to be clear, then the only way that the chair could accept that motion is if they, in their opinion, the motion wasn't defeated based on for cost reasons. Is that fair to say? Okay.
Sorry. The original motion was never put on the table. That is the position I'm taking. Had there been an amendment to the motion, in which we would have dealt with the amendment and then the amended motion, that would be different. But that is not the case.
Okay, I have a question of staff as well, if I could, on the tender. We are now more than a month past the time that staff had originally hoped this would be approved. I would like an estimate, best guess as to the likelihood that we will now go past the deadline for the grant.
Who is in a position to comment on that? I believe Cynthia is coming forward. Cynthia?
Through you, Mayor Zer, as I've said a few times over the last number of weeks, the real variable that we cannot control as staff is weather. So from a timeline perspective, if we were given a go-ahead, would we go? Absolutely. It's really difficult for us to predict what we will deal with in terms of weather over the next few months.
Historically speaking, there should be some reference in terms of when to start projects and when they need to be done by. So I guess I'm looking for the likelihood, just simply because your guess will be better than my guess. What is the likelihood that we're actually going to get this done on time with historical weather?
It will be challenging for us to get this completed on time, given that we've lost 5 weeks on the project.
Okay. Thank you. This is a difficult situation. This is something I don't relish doing, but in my opinion, accepting this motion is contrary to the motion that was already defeated, reconsidered, and defeated again. I don't see that I have a choice when I look back at options that were turned down that could have cost $167,000 plus HST. I don't see how we can approve a tender at $565,000 when we've just been advised by staff they're going to be challenged to meet the grant. So we're going to go from all in with the grant included. We were supposed to spend $200,000. So with all that in mind, it's with regret, but I must have to challenge the chair on this decision to accept this motion.
That is possible. I obviously accept the challenge. It's a question of staff. What is it? A procedural question?
There was Councillor Davey just made a comment that I'm not sure was the response that staff had made with respect to the construction. I think the question that was asked around construction was, are there potential implications in terms of getting the job done? But I think what we've heard in the past from Mr. Chapman is the way funding works with the federal government is you submit bills as you go along. You have to have the project done by March 31st. If the project is not done by March 31st, then they reimburse you up to 50% of the portion that's been done. So if 80% has been done, so that would be 80% of 560 or whatever, which would take it to 430. And so, and I think the federal grant is only 200,000. So we would still get the full federal grant under that scenario. Is that not correct, Mr. Chapman?
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mayor Zer, I think you're correct in that they would typically pay 50% of costs claimed, and so if we achieve the $400,000 mark by March 31st, it's reasonable to expect we would have full reimbursement. Our only cause for concern is that projects should have substantial completion by March 31st. If they don't, they might be deemed in default, and we would not receive funding. I think the risk of that, based on past experience, is pretty low, that generally speaking, we've seen the federal and provincial governments honor progress payments, and even if a project does go late, typically they would not claw back funding.
Thank you.
Okay. I think the question was called for on the procedural motion to challenge the chair on the ruling of the chair. Councillor Davey, I'm not offended by it. Okay. Probably. Colin, I didn't ask that question. A challenge, is that open for discussion?
Through the Mayor, no, the procedural bylaw states that with challenge of the chair is to provide a succinct reasoning as to why they made their ruling, and then it's to be voted on without discussion.
Okay, I will state that the reason for my ruling is that the original motion was not dealt with. Had there been an amendment, had the original recommendation been put on the table and an amendment made to it, we would have dealt with the amendment first and then the amended motion, which was not the case. So those who sustain the chair's ruling, please vote. Would those who sustain the chair, would you please vote at this point? Is this a recorded vote? Okay. Recorded vote of those who sustain the chair's ruling. That's correct. If you agree with what I have done, it is you vote yes. If you disagree with what I've stated, you vote no. We'll wait for the results. Ruling is sustained. Now, go back to Councillor Etherington's motion, which is essentially the original tendered amount. I have Councillor Gazzola to speak to that.
This is a complete farce. We've had 2 votes on this issue, and they have failed. Normally speaking, when a recommendation is brought to council and it's amended, the amendment kills the original motion, and you deal with the amended motion. And that's what we've done here, and twice this has failed. And according to what I understand, it should not be able to come back until there's a new term of council. We're just playing loose here with all the rules. Now, I understand there are a number of issues here. The biggest proponents of this whole issue are people in the neighborhood of Victoria Park. And I've heard a lot from them, and I respect what they are saying. And what I've heard in the last couple of weeks is there seems to be sympathy towards reviewing the whole issue, and perhaps going back, reconsidering attaching separate and distinct washrooms to the boathouse, which is an ideal location that was thrown out originally when we were involved with the tenant who was trying to run a business and was having to share the washrooms. We're into a totally different situation. So that is an opportunity that we can now look at that wasn't there before. I understand that just recently the MP for our region sent you, Mr. Mayor, and several other councillors a letter where he was looking to see if there's something could not be done with the payment with that grant issue. Has this been reported to council? No, we haven't heard a thing.
Well, clearly you have it, and other members of council do as well.
No, I don't have it. I saw a copy of it.
Well, precisely my point.
Well, why wasn't that made known to the public? I mean, this whole issue is ridiculous, and what the worst part of it is. It's a farce of the rules that we have in place and the rules that we have followed. So much to the point that you can count me off for I won't even be bothered here taking part in the vote.
Councillor Yunetsky?
I have to agree. 2 weeks ago, when we dealt with this matter, I was chairing the council meeting for reconsideration, and I provided, in my capacity, some flexibility to have some basic discussion for the topic of reconsidering it. Yet, when we did, I had to make sure that we had to vote on the reconsideration in full to bring it really on the table. In the end, the matter got defeated. And as is pointed out by Councillor Gazzola, and it was in my opinion as chair at the time, that the approval of the recommendation for the amendment took precedence, which defeated the original motion. And that was the end of the topic. So I'm not prepared to support this. I think we're going in the wrong direction. I think we're on a point of doing something that is contrary to the rules of council, of reconsidering something that we can't do in the term of our in our term of being here on council. It has to wait to the next term after we're elected. And we're going in the wrong direction. I'm surprised that the vote is going in that direction. So I'm totally not happy.
I can understand the sentiment. The motion for reconsideration that was dealt with at the last council meeting, the one I was not at, lost. Therefore, the item was not reconsidered. To the point that has been made earlier, an item cannot be reconsidered twice within a term of council. But it did not get considered twice because the motion failed for reconsideration. That is part of the ruling. Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, you know, I was very supportive of this initial project when we had budgeted $400,000 for it, and knowing that $200,000 of that was going to come from grant monies. I thought we were getting a good facility for a needed facility in Victoria Parks at lesser cost because of the granting. When this came back, significantly higher than the budgeted amount, I was taken back. And more importantly, I was surprised that we didn't do more to look at rescoping to reduce costs. I would have thought that would have been an initial response to it. And I made every effort possible to put forward and propose ideas that could have considerably rescoped the cost to bring it in line close to or at budget, where we would have still got the site that we originally had given direction to staff on, at the same time the facility that we had hoped for. Pretty much we're trying to get a Cadillac when we have budgeted only for a Chrysler. And to be honest, sometimes you have to reconsider and look at realities, fiscal realities, and we can't always afford the materials that we would like to have. And we have to be considerate of that. So because of the over budgeted amount, I can't support this, and I continue to say that.
Councillor Etherington, you moved the motion. I'll hold you till the end. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. First, question of staff. In terms of the funding element of Councillor Etherington's motion, back during the last budget, we had dedicated $600,000 from the former Local Environmental Action Fund to each of the major parks in the city. It wasn't explicit, but assuming we break out $200,000 each of that, could I get an idea of if that money's been used, and if not, how much is left in the account?
Mr. Chapman, are you able to answer that?
Yes, Mayor Zaire. To refresh all of Council's memory, you'll recall that in dealing with the remaining funds in the LEAF account, part of Council's decision through budget was to allocate $600,000 to the four major parks, Victoria Park, Huron Natural Area, Kiwanis Park, and McLennan Park. Over the spring and summer, operations staff have been working to identify priorities. As an example, within McLennan Park, it's on the list here, that would include things such as the West Side Trail, shade tree planting, and leash-free area lighting. And there are a number of related initiatives for each of the four parks. It's my understanding that the list has been defined, design is underway or is completed for basically everything on the list, and contracts have been awarded for about a third of the value. So that we have about $200,000 of contracts out there. For the remainder, some staff time would have been incurred. There are not contracts in place, so we don't need to move ahead, but certainly they're very well into the planning phase.
For the remaining two-thirds, they're well in place, you're saying?
In terms of planning,
okay.
But we've not awarded any contracts for construction, so those construction funds are not committed at this point.
If I wanted more information on this, is it necessary that we identify the funding source now, or can we, it's obviously that this is going to pass, but can council pass it and identify the funding source at a later date?
Mr. Chapman.
I would look to the chair, I suppose. My first reaction would be that it's probably bad practice to approve projects without funding in place. Knowing that we have a default funding scheme, which would include capital contingency and that sort of thing, if the matter really is deferred to a future date, but we have this as the fallback, I don't see any problem with that. So certainly you could deal with this ultimately through budget or direct staff to respond further with funding options. But again, I'd look for the chair to...
I suppose what we could do is take an amendment that would allow for the investigation of alternate funding for a portion of this from the fund that you referenced, and to be dealt with at the capital budget time, but that in the notwithstanding that, this, what has been described by staff, would be the fallback position, as Mr. Chapman has just said.
I would actually ask on the fund that we defer the funding portion.
I think we have to have something in the funding, in the recommendation for the essentially for the funding
as a fallback.
But as because it can't go ahead without the funding. But the exploring the alternate options, I think, would be an acceptable request.
Okay, so I'd also ask then that staff return with what's been done with the $600,000, what's planned, basically a full report if I could. And I would have comment as well when the time's appropriate.
Okay. I'll come back to the amendment in a moment. I have only one other speaker, that's Councillor Etherington. I do now Councillor Verbanovich and a couple others.
Well, just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I will be supporting the recommendation as I did originally. I too am not happy with the fact that the cost came in higher, but unfortunately we don't have an ability to dictate to the construction industry what they're going to tender. I think what's important to remember here is that this tender came in the lowest. I think the highest tender of the six other tenders was $220,000 or $240,000 higher than this one, with everybody else in between. So I think we need to keep that in mind, number one. Number two, we need to keep in mind that in terms of all of this, $200,000 is being paid for by the federal government. How did this become the number one priority? Well, I understand from the last meeting when this was dealt with, Councillor Yanetsky indicated that that was as a result of the input of the local MP, Stephen Woodworth, is what I understand was said in council, because it was our number 7 priority. However, once the funding became there, once the funding got there, I think what's important to remember is that we are getting, in terms of municipal tax dollars, we're getting these bathrooms for $367,000 roughly. We wouldn't be able to construct bathrooms of that significance on our own under any possible scenario. So I think without question it's good value for the taxpayers of Kitchener. And in the long run, it's going to ensure that we enhance our festival amenities for the tens of thousands of people that come into Victoria Park. It's going to provide a facility for our skaters in the city and in a location that the public said where it should go based on public input. And I think that needs to be kept in mind.
Councillor Glenn Graham.
Thank you very much. I was going to make a suggestion about reduction of costs to Councillor Etherington regarding the asphalt walkway, and also the substitution of brick if possible, only if possible, if it could be approved by the Heritage Committee in time. I would like to know if those would be potentially friendly.
I'm not certain what costs you're referring to and what those figures
are. Sorry, beg your pardon. So in the reports that we have...
And which report do you refer to?
Sure. So it's the October 3rd, 2013, and it's INS 13094, and the second page is 8A-2.
So just a moment. October 30 report?
October 3rd.
3rd, sorry. Were they chronological in this section? I didn't.
It should be towards the back and just before the appendix. Before the Heritage Committee report.
Okay, just bear with me. Point of order takes precedence. Councillor Urbanovich.
I do want this answered, but I also am cautioning you. I supported your ruling because you said that the original motion, the original recommendation from staff was never considered. There have been two other motions that have not been approved by council. One has been the original minus 40,000, which was back at the original meeting, and that lost on a tie vote, and that was a motion that I had made. I understand that at a subsequent meeting there was a motion to reconsider that decision, which was really an amended type of motion. And so I'm concerned if we're going to start throwing other numbers around and other amendments around, that we're getting into that path which isn't consistent with your ruling. So I'm just raising that as a caution.
Thank you for that. I first want to understand what Councillor Glenn Graham, you were stating. Now I have the page 8A-2.
Right. So the second element, installing asphalt walkway, and I don't believe, I'm not sure if that, sorry, I wasn't here. I'm not sure if that was considered. And also, I know that the substitution of brick was brought forward subsequently, so that would not have been considered. So I'm asking that would be considered if possible, if the building schedule and can be done in time with the consultation with Heritage Kitchener. So that's why it's different than the previous one.
Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, as much as I appreciate Councillor Glenn Graham's support, I agree with Councillor Urbanovich that this takes us dangerously close to where we were in the first place. And that is that we're moving back toward the whole point of my argument is that this is a different motion and that it does not include the kind of things that Councillor Glenn Graham is suggesting. I would not see that as a friendly amendment for that reason. And also, in earlier debate, and I think Councillor Glenn Graham was away in earlier debate, we established that there's no way you can get this through Heritage in time, and that these two items that he's suggesting are so minor. We're talking about $5,000, perhaps $9,000. I would certainly be opposed to, and I don't think he's suggesting that, but from a heritage point of view, I would certainly oppose to stripping that building of brick. And we went through all of that. So I think in order to tamper with this, we're playing with fire there. I'm confident this is a different motion, but if we move in that direction, we're really fuzzying that issue.
Yeah, and that has been part of this this issue. There's no question about it. In the going back and forth and sort of coming to the same point in all times, I would say that unless it was a friendly amendment, which it is not, that I would not accept that at the present time, because we were dealing with the original motion. Otherwise, we could get into a whole array, quite a circle here. However, I'll leave that with council.
So thank you. I'm happy with the discussion, and I'm willing to withdraw my suggestion. Is this the time for comments?
I think I've got, let's see, 4 people left, and we are basically at comment stage. So if you would like to finish out, yes.
Sure. With regard to the cost to the taxpayer, this is about 0.07 cents for the equivalent of the $200,000 for a Kitchener taxpayer, just over a few $1,000s for the whole city. And this is great value. If we didn't use this money, it would go to another community. And so I fully support the jewel of our city being treated appropriately by a standalone building. It's not an overbuild. We have a growing city with the growing use of Victoria Park, and I'm confident that this will reduce costs for additional washrooms, that porta potties and that kind of thing that are required later on, so it would recoup any other savings. This is I'm not sure of the number of years that this project would stand, but it's at least a 50-year, I'm confident of that. So we're building for the long term here. This is a good use of taxpayer money, and our city deserves this, and our park deserves this treatment. Thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. First off, I've just reconsidered, and I will withdraw my earlier amendment from the original motion. And sorry, we're in comments, correct? Comments, okay.
So we'll not take the amendment?
Yeah, so we'll not take the amendment.
Okay, that's fine.
I will look actually later to staff just for an update on how the LEAF funds were spent, but that's a different issue. In terms of comments, I have a lot of concern about how this went. I've often, people ask how council goes out frequently, and I always tell people that, if you actually watch us work, sometimes you might think that there's some squabbling going on, that sort of thing. I said, but if you look at what we actually achieve, I think we're pretty representative of the community. I think this is the first time we actually did the community a disservice, primarily in the way that we handled it, from delaying it for a month, and now this washroom could end up costing us more than the already high estimate. So what we did originally, we went to the public and asked them where they would prefer bathrooms, and we gave them a cost. One of the costs was, I'm actually not sure how it went from $167,000 plus HST to $250,000, but it was there anyway. It was in the range of about $200,000. And with that figure, the public told us, and again, this is only folks that decided to come out to the meeting, the public told us that they preferred, for an extra $200,000, $400,000 all in, we'll build a standalone facility. That was what they told us. That was the public engagement. It came in at $565,000. It was way over. We could have went back and looked at the Joseph Street. We could have looked back at other options that would have brought this cost down. Now, on the other issue I want to address is that I've had some concern about supporting Victoria Park, and I want to be unequivocal. This council, to my knowledge, and I look to staff to clarify, this council has invested far more in Victoria Park in one term than I think any term of council in history. So I dismiss that outright in terms of support of Victoria Park. I think it's a great park. I love the park, and I'm happy to support it. This is just one of those areas where we've spent millions and millions of dollars in this term, and I think that we need to dial it back a little bit. So in essence, what we've done now is we said $565,000 less $40,000 is too much money, but $565,000 plus any potential overruns is okay, and I don't get that. It doesn't make any material sense. So I, of course, will not be supporting this, and frankly, I'm concerned about how the whole thing is played out.
Councillor Naiadis.
I disagree with Councillor Davies' comments. I think if you look through the smoke, the reality is, at the end of the day, the public's going to save $35K and have a better facility. And as for argument's sake that the $200K is still taxpayers' money from the feds, well, yes, that's true, but I'd rather have that money spent in our community than somewhere else in Canada, and that's why I'm going to support the motion, because I think it makes the most economical and community sense.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, I wasn't trying to jump the queue, so I wasn't trying to push up my hand. So I just waited to be patient. I had tried to buzz in when Councillor Glenn Graham had wanted to make an amendment for changing in some of the materials. And I'm not going to challenge you on your decision on it, but I still would request you to consider some of the points I'm going to make, which are originally, and you weren't in that meeting, I had requested staff to bring back suggestions, and that's part of the report that's before us today, of different materials that could be used. And this report that I had requested for did come back in last meeting in council, and it was deferred to this meeting so that it could come in with all the other information. So it was my understanding that we still had that ability. As to the points made earlier, that this would be the same as the original motion, which had asked for a 40,000 reduction. And I would like to refute that point because it didn't specify actual areas where they could be reduced. It just said to an overall number. So I think it would still be a different motion. I think just for fairness, it would be right to take that amendment and let it go whichever way it does, because it should be pointed that we did consider looking at different options that could have reduced the cost of the facility. So I leave it to you.
And I'm going to think about that. Councillor Etherington.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just had some comments, if I could. And before I get to those comments, I wanted to say, because the language here has been pretty strong, in my opinion, nothing is ever achieved in this chamber with the kind of theatrics that we've seen. I don't mind people disagreeing strongly with what I say. Some people do that. But to this whole attitude of I'm going to take my ball and leave, those people are elected to represent people. So no matter what they like or dislike, they should stay in the chamber and vote. That's one comment. Now, on the washrooms, I think councillors and the public agree that we need separate public washrooms at the clock tower end of the park. I also understand and share the concerns about cost, believe me. But considering the cost of the other two washrooms that staff looked at, the one at McLennan Park and Huron, the price of this washroom compares favorably when you consider inflation. I believe the cost roughly of the other two floated between, if you look at inflationary dollars, floated between $550,000 and $586,000 compared to this one, which I believe is around $560,000. We also agree there's still the possibility, and I recognize that is a possibility, not guaranteed, that we'll get this $200,000. I hope we do, and I hope we move fast to get shovels in the ground. I've always believed it would be wise to construct a quality building in our flagship heritage park that could last up to 100 years instead of developing a stripped-down, lower quality building. The lesser washrooms, if we build those, are guaranteed to give us future problems in the park where, as has been mentioned, we've spent up to $11 million to upgrade that facility, and we've done a great job of it. I also think that some people and councillors are blaming Heritage for this cost when, in essence, it is nothing more than basic, good quality urban design standards. There's very little heritage involved in this particular building. Recently, I was among those who wondered if we could build the washrooms in, as Councillor Gazzola said, in the boathouse or next to the boathouse. But after talking to staff, I realized that if we do that, we're likely to torpedo the future of the boathouse and torpedo the plans of the short list of possible operators of that facility, that bar and restaurant and music facility that I very much want to see succeed. So I think we need to stop flopping around, and once again, without losing sight of our low tender price and that federal grant, push ahead with the washroom projects. And by the way, I would ask, strongly ask, that councillors please be thoroughly updated during construction about any other possible budget increases on this project. I think we've got several reasons for moving ahead as quickly as possible, and then I'll be finished. The first reason has to do with the fact that we went through a long process of getting people across the city to comment on this issue. They asked for better quality washrooms at this end of the park. We held public meetings and people voted in favour of this location, and that had the support and agreement of the Victoria Park Neighbourhood Association and the Victoria Park Working Group. My second reason has to do with the rapidly increasing use of the park. We've already touched on that. There are huge festivals, there are events every weekend, scores of weddings, and the demand for washrooms already exists, and it's likely to increase. I mentioned the boathouse and its future success. Also, as a member of the Heritage Committee from Council, I support efforts to build something that will fit into the heritage values of the park. These washrooms in our outstanding downtown park will benefit the entire city, and for that and numerous other reasons, the project has always had and still has my full support. So I'll be voting in favour, obviously.
Okay. Said I would have one more speaker, and then I'll come back to what Councillor Singh had asked for. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to say that since the beginning I've supported the project as is. I think it's been a long time to get here. Most of us have had verbal diarrhea over this one, but we'll continue to move forward. I definitely support the recommendation that's before us today. I think it's important for our community. It's in line with all of the other washroom facilities that we've built of this kind, and so I think the deferral was appropriate, and how we got here today is appropriate in order for us to make the best decision for the community. So I will support in favor of the I will vote in favor of the recommendation.
Thank you. Now, to the point that those are the only comments that I have. First of all, I too would say that we have to keep in mind that the point's been made that we have invested a great deal of time and money in the Victoria Park, and it's true, we have. And the reference is made that it is basically for the people who are living there. We're hearing only from the people who are living in the vicinity, and that is not true. The washrooms are a park facility. This is a regional park, not just a city park. And for the people who live in that area immediately around the park, I'm going to guess, I don't know what the numbers are. Is it 500? When we have thousands of people attending events in that park from all over the city and all over the region. In that way, it is similar to what we continually invest in the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium Complex. It is a larger city facility, and not just for the that Eastwood community. In terms of what Councillor Singh was asking for, the items, I have taken a close look at each of the items that are on that report. He makes a valid point in terms of this information was essentially not dealt with because the reconsideration was not dealt with. However, I would say that all of the items that are on that 8A2 and 3, save one, would require heritage approval. And the one that would not would be the installing of asphalt walkway versus the concrete walkway. So the one item could be dealt with today without any further approval from heritage. And the others, I would say, would virtually kill the intent of the motion to begin with. And so I would rule that all of the others would not be applicable. But if there is and this would be going back to Councillor Glenn Graham, if there is an amendment, it would be for only that one item for the rationale I've just given, and we would deal with it as a specific amendment. Is that the case? Okay. The
point, just a quick question.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, to that point, a quick question, because I didn't have an opportunity to ask staff questions when this report did come back, because we had just deferred it. and it was kind of hijacked and referred to this meeting, so I didn't have opportunity to ask those questions.
Okay, very quickly.
Yes. So to Mayor Zier's point that it would require a heritage approval, one of the options that I had asked of, and this may be more appropriate for Ms. Fletcher, was using brick or stone veneer instead of actual brick, where to the outside eye, for a heritage perspective, it would still give it that same brick or stone look, only internally, it's pretty much comes to the depth versus 1.5 inches or 3-4 inch, which would be an actual brick. Would that be appropriate?
Ms. Fletcher.
Through you, Mayor Zier, the reason that I've invited my colleague down is I'll speak to it from a building standpoint and vandalism and the quality of building standpoint, but then Mr. Benson may want to comment from a heritage standpoint. A brick veneer covering is certainly something that is reasonable in certain applications. We would not recommend it for a park building. It does not stand up as well to a brick and block construction, so we will be dealing with, whether it's graffiti removal, whether it's vandalism. We'll be back repairing and replacing brick veneer on that building on a regular basis.
Okay.
So we would not recommend that type of construction.
So quickly to that point, just observing what's in my ward, I have a community center, Chandler and Mowat Community Center, and it doesn't use actual brick or actual stone.
Right.
It uses stone veneer. Looks really nice, has a very high-end look to it, but it uses a stone veneer. So why would we use it there, and it wouldn't be appropriate for here?
Through you, Mayor Zier, I would have to review that application. My recommendation for most of our community centers, arenas, would be to put brick or block at least 12 feet up. And if you wanted to use an eave system or a brick veneer, do it higher up. Realistically, it doesn't stand up as well to balls being kicked against them, bikes being run into them, and moisture can get behind something like an extruded insulated panel system. It just does not stand up as well as brick and block.
Okay, all right. Well, Mr. Mayor, I think I'll leave it at that. I still think consideration should have been given, but enough points have been made, and I just don't want to beleaguer this much more than it already has. So, and just to change this for a concrete versus asphalt walkway, which is a 3,000 difference, I think it's a moot point. So I'll leave it to Councillor Glenn Graham if he still wants to.
It may be, but that's the rationale that I was giving to these items and trying to give deference to the report of October the 3rd. So Councillor Glenn Graham has put forward the motion, which an amendment, which would be installing asphalt walkways versus concrete walkway. Excuse me. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Singh. Dealing with the amendment only. Those in favor? Those opposed? And I am opposed. Oh, sorry, you're what? You were opposed? I'm opposed. So therefore it is defeated. We'll now deal with the original motion and recorded vote. Motion is carried with 3 absentees, Councillor Scazola, Yanetsky, and of course Councillor Fernandez is away today. So that should deal with this matter. There are a couple of other minor items on the agenda. Authorization to go into camera. I believe there is just the one item now, so that would be the related to land acquisition and disposal matter. Moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Galway-Seelock. Those in favour? Opposed? That's carried. Bylaws for 3 readings, moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Davey. Those in favour? Opposed? That is carried. This meeting is adjourned. And